plus years, after having grown old and getting to know one another's wives and children, having accomplished things that we hadn't yet dreamed. And yet here I am today. We haven't quite lived those fuller lives, but looking around today, it is as clear as I always assumed it was that he made the mark on our communities. He made the marks on our community that he did. So I want to speak something to that community building and express how important an accomplishment just that was. Or at least, at the very least, to describe something of the form that community takes. We all make all sorts of plans, and the more I talk to people, the more it sounds like Mikey had made grand plans with half of the friends who made it here today. There was all the travel we were going to do. We'd go to each other's homes, to Europe, places like his favorite vacation spots in Oaxaca, Mexico. Once upon a time, there was nowhere he would rather be than Puerto Escondido. But most of us never made these trips, because we always knew where to find each other at his other favorite place. Here, magnetically attracted to Brooklyn and the trappings of a community built up here, where he could be more than confident that it would never be more than a couple of months until he got to surprise and hug many of us just by walking through that door. There were times we saw each other 7 days a week for months on end, and there were times that we didn't. We simply didn't need to. And when he left for the family farm in Georgia, there was the lingering, tangible promise that he would be here soon. He was literally just as likely to stop through as he was when he was living a mile or two north of here in Greenwood. I still feel that at any moment now he might just walk on through that door with a giant backpack, perhaps a brand new hat with a new patch sewn on, a big smile on his face, knowing he was back here to hang out with his friends like the good old days, where many of us, in effect, sitting here, were ready in wait for that spark he so generously brought to the table. That connective spark of joy, togetherness, that to a certain extent only he could bring. A few of us were talking about Mike the other night at the bar, discussing how we all seem to have met him in similar circumstances. He was adept at picking strangers from the crowd and making great new buddies out of them. Mike was a great social glue, the hub around which he built his own spokes, and who very often would introduce himself to strangers, and then that person to the greater group that made up the core of our community. All it took was the kind of mutual recognition of friendliness, or some kind of major or minor point of shared interest, that he was ready to find in any conversation. And bam! He knew that you had a friend in town, and that through him, and this place, and these people around him, something that you could call home. I remember meeting Mike that way one day about a decade ago. I was lonely, and in his own way, so was he. But Mike and I immediately reminded each other of ourselves in a lot of ways. We used to share the joke that we were the flower boys, the lily and the rose. There was once even a time when we sometimes even looked alike. You should have heard at the funeral last weekend how often I heard things like that. But more than anything, we immediately saw that we were both ardent lovers of music and the arts, both well-read in history and fiction, privately passionate about our various interests. Genuinely so, in ways that were very hard to share with just anyone. So at the risk of picking something more obscure about Mike, I wanted to talk a little about a more literary story that helped me somewhat a week or so ago after I heard about his sudden passing. This is a story about an author that I remember he once quite appreciated. I'm not reading him out loud, but this is a story about Franz Kafka, another charming and funny man who studied the law, but hated the very idea of becoming a lawyer. When Kafka was an older man, he found himself in the park one day, helping a young girl. She had come to him, a complete stranger, to deal with the fact that she had lost her doll. And so he helped her to look for her, walking around the park in a determined search, but unfortunately never finding him. Based off this tenuous connection with this little girl, Kafka spent the rest of that final year of his life hanging around this park, where he knew he could run into her. He would read her letters that he wrote from the doll's perspective, and the letters tell the story of the doll out on travels and grand adventures around the world. She was very sorry, the doll said, but she had to go off and explore the world, to make new friends, to make new stories for herself. But always with the assurance that she still loved the little girl and would come back someday. And so before Kafka died, he left her a new, but of course completely different doll, explaining the differences by telling this little girl that in its travels, the travels had left it transformed. After the little girl grew up and Kafka passed, she saw that in its hand was a rolled up note from the great author that simply read, "Everyone you love you will eventually lose, but in the end, that love will always return, only in a different form." Mike was certainly one of the smartest men I ever knew. He had the courage of his kind convictions. He was smart enough to do well in law school and work at the Cato Institute. But more than that, he was smart enough to know he didn't want to be a lawyer at all. More than smart, he was certainly more quietly and sometimes loudly charismatic man. People gravitated towards him. He to them. If you earned that twinkle in his eye, you knew it. He would be a steadfast, constant friend from that point on. There's no getting away from the fact that the majority of our memories and relationships with Mike centered around our local water emporium. But this place wasn't just any bar. It was what you think about when you think of actual social clubs in times gone by. The center of a real community. Lucky Dog in the 2010s was a true third space, where you could set your watch to the fact that by 4 or 5 o'clock, there would be 12, 20, maybe 50 people from the neighborhood who collected just to see one another. And Mike was more than a huge part of that, all the way up to when he moved back to Georgia and beyond. When he came back for his frequent holidays that he would inevitably extend well past just because he wanted to stick around. It was all just to be near so many souls who genuinely wanted to see him in return, because he inspired true camaraderie. Mike gave a lot, mostly of himself, effortlessly, and with genuine generosity. He left his mark on so very many people that I know there are many around the world who would like to be here today. I have spoken to many of them who truly share their love, and I really believe are here in spirit. One thing I'm very thankful of is that Mike was never short on saying "I love you" to his friends. There were very frequent group bear hugs and rapturous "I love you guys" that betrayed actual care for one another. It helped leave his mark on us, spiritually, emotionally. The mark he left on both my life and my community is indelible. It is deeper than the deep mark he embedded into the physical wood of the bar, down at what was always our people-watching spot at the end. Around 9 years ago, he burned it in, and later drove a BB into the wood repeatedly, hammering it in with a Lone Star. You could find it at the end of the bar, about the size of a quarter and the shape of an M. Even after considerable sanding and re-lacquering and years of spilt beer, that Burns BB mark is still there, shining brightly, if only you know where to look. He was a handy guy and also made this ring that I wear daily, made out of a coin I brought back from Europe as a kid. But frankly, I don't need things like these to know that I'll think of Mike daily. Even away, he was so constant a presence in so many lives here that he is not only with us today, but tomorrow, and for the rest of our lives will be a positive impact on even those who weren't able to make it today. Whatever you believe about death and spirit, and all those things. There's one thing I do know, and that is that there's a little Mikey in all of us who knew him. I'll end it there because I could never say enough. There will always be a hole in many of our hearts that no amount of mere eulogizing can fill. But when we do think of him and feel for him, we feel him. We feel something of the love that he so freely and infectiously gave to all those he came in contact with. We feel his love transform, because through knowing him, we ourselves were transformed. That love we once felt will always return, if only in new form, within ourselves. We here at Lucky Dog today, we are all lucky dogs.
Yeah.
We are all so lucky to know Mike.
Yes.
So a toast is to my friend Mikey. And as they said, it is alma mater. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs! Well said, Chris. Absolutely. Well said, Chris. Well said. We love